Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophet Speak. This is Saul Weinreb, the host of the podcast, and I am proud to study with you together the chapter 24 of the second book of Samuel. This is the final chapter of the book of Samuel, which has been divided into two. So we have the first and the second books, although it's all actually one book. And this last chapter is really, the way I understand this, and it's really meant as a rejoinder for the hint of arrogance that we heard in David's song that began the last chapter 23. In the last chapter 23, David spoke of the tremendous greatness that he had achieved, the level of being the leader over the people, ordained by God to rule justly, etc. So if that gets a little bit to your head, this following chapter is what happens as a result. And David was humbled by this is what happened. A leader is not just a light, a sun which brings, like he described last time, a sun which brings, a light and growth, and like rain which brings the grass in the fields and all these wonderful ideas. But it also entails a tremendous amount of responsibility. And when that arrogance gets to the head of the king, the people suffer because of it. Even innocent people suffer because of bad decisions that a leader makes. And David is about to learn that lesson. When understood within this context, this chapter makes a lot of sense. And it makes a lot of sense as to why, as to why the book of Samuel ends with this note, in order to show us the humbling, so to speak, of David, to learn his lesson. So it says, Vayosef af Adonai lacharos b'Yisrael. The anger of God became increased even more against the people of Israel again. It's not clear exactly what the anger was. It would seem that it may have been some kind of hunger, a famine of some sort. And we've had a famine mentioned before, so this was another one. Exactly when this happened during the timeline of David's career is not mentioned, but it's mentioned in the book as a pair to chapter 23 for the reason which I described before, to show that, what happens when a king thinks too much of himself. So, Vayoset et David bohem lemar, and David became convinced or pushed, right, to regarding the people, saying, Lech minei et Yisrael v'et Yehuda. Go out and count the people of Israel and the people of Yehuda. Now, the traditional commentaries and the traditional understanding of this is that we were commanded in in the book of Exodus, right, that the people are not to be counted. The people of Israel are not to be counted in person, only to be counted by means of their donations of shekels, of half shekels to the temple, and that the people would suffer if census was counted. Now, what's wrong with counting the people? This is a very difficult concept to understand. What's so bad? So what's wrong with doing a census? This chapter gives us a hint as to what's wrong with doing a census. And this is what the point is. A census in those days was generally done for military reasons, to count the people. The census in the Torah was always count the men above a certain age, the men that are able to go to war. It's explicitly stated in every census in the Torah that we're counting the men that are capable of war. So before a battle, it makes sense, and it has a very important purpose. You need to know how many soldiers you have, how do you divide them up, how to fight the war, how to develop strategy, etc. That makes sense and a purpose. A census in peacetime, although nowadays we have a census for various reasons, dividing up the regions and government, etc., in different ways. There's a lot of reasons for a census, but it can also be arrogance. It could be something that a king does to count his people so that he can feel great knowing about how many people he rules over, how big his kingdom is. So the issue with ordering the census now David sees the people, there's suffering, there's famine, and David wants to count the people. And the evidence to support my contention here will be in David's reaction when the people get punished, and you'll see this shortly, several verses from now. But at this point, David then goes ahead and says, "Let's count the people." And if you think of David in the context of the song that he sang at the beginning of the last chapter, I'm the great leader of the people. I bring sun and rain to the people. I'm like the one who brings and makes everything grow and wonderful, wonderful. But it's not so wonderful. The people are suffering. People are dying. But so David's reaction is, let's count them. So, Vayomer Hamelech El Yoav, Sarachai El Asher Ito, the king said to Yoav, who is his chief officer with him, Shut na b'chol shiftei Yisrael, I want you to go and travel around among all of the tribes of Israel, Midon v'ad Beersheva, from Dan v'ad Beersheva. Again, one hears a hint of arrogance here. From all the way in the south to all the way in the north, I'm sorry, actually all the way in the north to all the way in the south, but same deal. Ufiktu et ha'am, and I want you to count all of the people via dati, so that I should know eight mispar ha'am, the amount of people in the nation. Now, had he said, I need to know the number because I need to know how to help, how to this, but he didn't say that. He just, so that I should know, right? But Yomer Yoav el HaMelech, the Yoav then said to the king, V'yosef Adonai Elohecha Eloham, kohem v'chaim. May God add, may the Lord your God add to the nation like the amount that they are, and even more like the amounts that they are, mea pa'amim 100 times. Ve'enei Adoni HaMelech ro'os. The eyes of my master the king you can see. V'adoni HaMelech, but my master the king, lama chafetz b'davar hazeh. What do you even want this for? In other words, what do you need this for? So Yoav is here criticizing the king. This is not the first time Yoav, who was a close confidant of the king and was able to, advise him. And Yoav says, this is not important right now. This is not the issue right now. It's just to know how many people. So in other words, yeah, may you be powerful. May you have many, 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 many people. But you really need to know the number. Is that so important? So Yoav understood that this was not the right approach at this point. But the commander of the king was strengthened. In other words, he pushed Yoav, the Al-Sarei Achayel, and he pushed the other officers of the army. Yoav, so therefore Yoav had to listen to his commander, the king, so his commander-in-chief. So he went out, V'sarei Achayel, and all of the other officers of the army, Lifnei HaMelech, they left the king's palace. They went out, Lifgodet to Amet Yisrael, to count the people of the nation, people of Israel. Vayavru et Hayarden, they went and they crossed the Jordan River. Remember to count the people that were on the other side of the river. Vayachnu va'aroer, and they camped in Aroer, Yamin ha'ir, to the right of the city, Asher b'toch hanachal hagod ve'el yazer, which was in the Gad riverbed, and Yazer v'yavo hagilada, they went up to Gilad, ve'el eretz tachtim chodshi, and to the land of tachtim chodshi, v'yavo Danan, they went to Dan, so they went back to the other side, Ya'an v'saviv el Tidon, they went all the way around to Tidon, Sidon, which is way up in the north, to the people that lived all the way that far north. Vayavo mivtar Tzor, and they went to the fortress of Tzor, Tyre, v'kol arei hachivi v'kanani, and the cities of the Chivites and the Canaanites. The simple understanding would be that these were nations that were subjugated under David's command. So David was counting not just the people of Israel, but even or it could mean the people Israelites that settled in the conquered towns of the Chivi, the Kanani. But either way, David is getting account of his kingdom by Yetzu el Negev Yehuda Beersheva, and then they went to the south where Judah is, and all the way down south to the Beersheva, by Yashutu b'chol haaretz, and they spread out and travel among the whole land. By Yavo miktzei tisha chodashim yesrim yom Yerushalayim, and at the end of 9 months and 20 days, they came back to Jerusalem with the final count. Vayitein Yoav et mispar mifkad ha'am el HaMelech. So Yoav gave the final count of the nation to the king. Vatihi Yisrael, and the people of Israel were Shmona me'ot elef ish chayil sholev cherev, 800,000 men who were capable of drawing the sword of the people of Israel. The Ish Yehuda. Remember by now the difference between the tribes of Israel and the tribes tribe of Judah was already established. This was something we've seen already now back in the book of Judges days. that the two had already developed distinct cultures, distinct identities, although they were united under David's rulership. And among the people of Judah were 500,000. By now, the people of Judah are already getting closer and closer in number to all of the other tribes put together. They're still not quite as big, but getting close. Vayach leiv David oso achrechein safar et ha'am. And now David had regret for what he did. Now he had the number. So instead of saying, wow, yeah, I have so many people under me, he realized this was a big mistake. This was unnecessary. Why did I do this? Just to make myself feel good? It doesn't feel so good when I do something just to make myself feel good. So, Vayomer David el Adonai. And David then turned to God and said, Chatasi ma'od asher asisi. I have done a terrible sin, that which I did. V'ata Adonai, and now God, ha'averno et avon avdecha ki niskalti ma'od. Please, God, take away the sin of your servant, ki niskalti mi'od, because I have done something so foolish. Right? David immediately realized, thinking that he was going to get buoyed by this great number that he's going to find out, and he's going to feel all proud of himself. He realized that that was just pride, and that what he had done was dumb, was foolish, as the verse said. As David himself said, ki niskalti mi'od, I acted foolish. Vayakam David baboker, and David then woke up after, crying during the night and praying, as we just read. Udvar Adonai haya el Gad hanavi, and the word of God had come to the prophet Gad. This is the only place where we hear of this prophet. José David Lemar, and he was at this time the seer, the prophet of David, and God had spoken to God as follows: Haloch v'dibarta el David. Go and speak to David as follows. Ko amar Adonai. So says God in answer to your prayer. Now think about this. David's pride in ordering this count, right, was a sin of pride, thinking of himself as this great leader. Once he realizes that it was a sin of pride, he turns to God and asks for forgiveness. He realizes how foolish he was. What David is about to realize is that being a leader is not just being a leader in this great, wonderful position of leading all these hundreds of thousands of people, but it also entails responsibility that when you do something foolish, the people suffer. It's a tremendous responsibility. It's not all wonderful, great, wonderful stuff about bringing justice and righteousness and being the sun and the rain and all that stuff and being the anointed of God and the future and all these. But that's all great and wonderful. But if you slip up and make a mistake, people will die. And that's the lesson David is about to learn. It's not, you may not suffer physically right away, but you will cause others to die. So, Haloch v'dibarta el David, say to David, Ko amar Adonai, so says God, Shalosh anochi notel alecha. I am giving you three choices. B'char lecha achat me'em v'esalach. You choose one of those three, and I will do it for you. And this is what it's almost like a Sophie's choice. Well, choose between tragedy 1, tragedy 2, or tragedy 3, and all those tragedies are going to happen to the people that you're responsible for, to other people, and you're going to have to make that choice. And why is this? To demonstrate to David that you, as a king, are responsible for other people, and when you make choices and you make bad choices, other people suffer. Vayavogad el David vayagidlo, and David came, and God, the prophet, came to David and told him, Vayomer lo, hatavo lecha sheva shanim ra'av ba'artzecha. Do you want that 7 years of hunger should come in your land? V'im shlosha chadashim, or do you want that you should have 3 months nusach lifnei tzarecha, that you're going to lose battles and run away from your enemies while he's chasing you? V'im heyos, or do you want shloshet yamim dever ba'artzecha, 3 days of a plague that breaks out in your land? Ata, now da ura'eh, you will think about this, and you will see ma ashiv sholachi davar, right? That God is saying, I want you to think about this question, so that he that sent me, meaning God, what should I tell him? What is it that you want to do? So here we have a terrible question David is being asked. because of David's mistakes, the people are going to have to suffer. And what suffering should that be? Should that be suffering of famine for 7 years, suffering of loss in battle, and the tremendous death and destruction that entails for 3 months, or 3 days of a terrible plague? Now, so how is David going to approach this? And David approaches it in an interesting way. Someone could think, well, he might pick the shortest one. Maybe he'll pick, which one is he going to pick? So what is David going to say? Verse 14. Vayomer David el God. So David said to God, Tsar li ma'od. I am in terrible pain. I'm in a terrible situation. Niplo navi ad Adonai. Please let us fall into the hands of God. Ki rabim rachamav, because God is merciful. Uviad adam alapola. But I do not want to fall into the hands of human beings. So what David is choosing is the one that's in the hand of God, which is the plague. The other two would necessitate David and the people being subservient to others. The 3 months of losing in battle, of course, he would put him in service of other human beings, at the mercy of other human beings. A hunger would obviously necessitate that the people turn to the surrounding nations for help for food. So basically, both of those would mean that they would be at the mercy of human beings. But a plague puts them at the mercy of God and God alone. And David says, I'd rather be in God's hands so that we can be subservient to him and pray to him for an end of the plague. And maybe we can find some way out of this. So, Vayitein Adonai Dever B'Yisrael, and God began a plague among the people of Israel, Mehaboker V'yad Eis Moed, from the morning until that specific time, right? Vayamas min ha'ami dan v'ad Beersheva shivim elef, and 70,000 people died among the people all the way from the north to all the way in the south. Vayishlach yado hamalach Yerushalayim, and when the angel, in other words, the death, the plague, came to Jerusalem, the shachata, to destroy it, Vayinochem Adonai al hara, and God changed his mind over the evil and decided to end the plague. Vayomer lamalach hamashchis ba'am, and he said to the angel that was destroying the people, in other words, the plague that was spreading among the people, Rav, it's enough. Atah heref yadecha, hold back your hand. Don't do this anymore. At that point, to malach Adonai haya im goren ha'aravna hayevusi, and the plague stopped. People stopped dying when the plague reached the place of the granary of Aravna the Yevusi, which is, of course, we'll find out in a minute, the future site of the Holy Temple. Vayomer David el Adonai biroto et hamalach hamakeva am. And this is a really crucial verse here, which helps us understand this entire chapter and supports the reading which I have been making of this entire chapter. And he said, Hinei anochi chatasi. David said, I am the one who sinned. V'anochi ha'avesi. I am the one that had made a mistake. Ve'ele hatzon me'asu, and the sheep, in other words, my people. And this is David speaking no longer as this grand king, the Mashiach, the anointed of God, the light, the sun, all this grand stuff that he said in the last chapter, but he's talking himself as a shepherd over his sheep, which is a much more humble image. And it's the image that David started out when he was just a plain, simple shepherd, looking at his people. And because of my decision, because of my mistake, the tzon, the sheep, the beautiful, wonderful sheep, what did they do wrong? Tihina yodcha bi ubebeis avi. If you're going to make someone suffer, make me suffer. Make my father's house suffer. In other words, Beis Avi is saying, my family. David is basically saying, take away the kingship from me. I'm responsible, and because of me, and this was the most humbling response to the arrogance that we heard last time. David realizing that my mistakes as king, my being arrogant, my thinking that I'm great, my wanting to count the people and show how great I am because of how many people I rule over, if that's the way I act, then people will suffer, the people will die. Why make other people die for my mistakes? Punish me, David says. But that's not what happened. Vayavo God And God said El David Bayomahu to David on that day, Vayomerlo, and he said, Alei hakem laDonai mizbeach begoron haravna ebusi. You still have a job to do. And the way to do this is to start leading the people in the right way. Lead the people back to God. And to do that, get ready for the establishment of the temple at that spot where the plague stopped. Right? And establish an altar there. Vayal David kidvar God kasher tziva Adonai. And David went up as God had told him and as God had commanded. Vayashkef Aravna. And Aravna, the owner of the granary, this Jebusite who had the granary, saw Vayaret HaMelech v'et Avadav, and he saw the king and his servants Ovrim Alav that were coming towards him. Vayetzei Aravna v'yeshtachvu l'melech apavartza, and Aravna, the owner of the granary, came out and bowed to the king, down to with his face to the ground. Vayomer Aravna, and Aravna said, Madu abba Adoni HaMelech el abdo. Why is my master the king coming to his servant? Vayomer David, and David said, Liknot me'emcha tagoren, because I want to purchase from you this granary, livnot mizbeach Adonai, to build an altar to God, so that the plague will stop and it won't continue past this point, and it won't continue killing people in the nation. Vayomer Aravna el David, and Aravna said to David, Hikach vayal Adoni HaMelech hatov be'einav. Let the master take it and let him do as he pleases. Now, there's no need to buy it. Re'eh habakar la'olah. Here is cattle for the offering, and here's what you need: the boards of the threshing floor. You can use all of this for the wood to bring the sacrifice. Hakol nasan Aravna hamelech Aravna hamelech lamelech, right? Everything Aravna gave to the king for the king. Vayomer Aravna lamelech, and Aravna said to the king, Adonai Elohecha yirtzecha, may the Lord your God act kindly to you, do well to you. In other words, and stop this plague. Vayomer Amelech al Aravna, the king said to Aravna, Lo ki kano ekne me'oscha b'mechir. I'm not going to take this as a present, but I'm going to buy it for a price, so that this spot will have been purchased legitimately. No one will ever be able to say that the king took it or Aravna gave it not willingly, but here is the money for it. V'lo a'aleh l'Adonai Elohai olot chinam. I'm not going to give God things that I didn't pay for, things that things that weren't paid for, but olot, sacrifices that are free. Vayiken David et Hagor, and so therefore David paid for the granary v'et habakar, and he paid for the cattle, and was willing, because Aravna was willing to give it on his own, bekesef shkalim chamishim, for 50 silver shekels. Vayiven sham David mizbeach la'Adonai, and David built there a altar to God. Vayal olotu shlamim, and he brought offerings of sacrifices, burnt sacrifices, and peace offerings. Vaye'oter Adonai la'aretz, and God responded to the people's prayers. Vate'otzar ha'mageifa me'al Yisrael, and the plague ended from the people of Israel. So the book of Samuel here ends with the purchase, with David fulfilling his real purpose. Until now, David's accomplishments were almost all military accomplishments, military achievements. Here we see that what God wanted from David ultimately was to begin the process of bringing the people to focus their attention on the temple of God, to the worship of God, and for fulfilling God's desires and way of life upon this world. Thus concludes the book of Samuel. Thank you so much for studying the book of Samuel together with me. I really appreciate those of you that listened. I know that during this book, I had to take a few breaks, but hopefully we will soon start the book of Kings, which we're going to study together next. And looking forward to studying the book of Kings together with you. And after that, continuing on until we complete all of Nevi'im and Ketuvim, all of the prophets and the writings, as we have studied together now for several years. Have a wonderful day.